Robert Downey Jr. His life story isn't just about fame and success, it's about redemption, about falling from grace and rising back up in a way that no one thought was possible. Before he became the face of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, before Iron Man made him a household name, Robert Downey Jr. was broken. He had everything: fame, money, talent, and he lost it all. His story isn't just about making a comeback. It's about rebuilding a shattered life and turning it into something extraordinary. Robert Downey Jr. was born into Hollywood royalty. His father, Robert Downey Sr., was an underground filmmaker, and his mother, Elsie, was an actress. Acting wasn't just in his blood, it was his destiny. From a young age, Robert was surrounded by the glitz and chaos of the entertainment industry. He made his acting debut at just 5 years old in his father's film Pound. But behind the flashing lights and red carpets, things were far from perfect. Robert's father had a dark side. He struggled with substance abuse. And as shocking as it sounds, Robert's introduction to drugs came from his father. When Robert was just 6 years old, his father handed him a marijuana joint, not as a mistake, but as a bonding moment. Robert later said it was his way of trying to connect with his father. But that moment would shape the rest of his life in ways he never imagined. By the time he was a teenager, Robert was drinking and using drugs regularly, but his talent was undeniable. In the 1980s, he became a part of Hollywood's elite, starring in films like Weird Science and Less Than Zero. In Less Than Zero, he played a young, privileged man spiraling into addiction. What no one knew was that Robert wasn't acting. The line between his roles and his reality was starting to blur. By the early 1990s, Robert Downey Jr. was at the top of his game. He was charming, funny, and a brilliant actor. In 1992, he was nominated for an Academy Award for his portrayal of Charlie Chaplin in Chaplin. He was Hollywood's golden boy. But behind closed doors, things were unraveling. Drugs weren't just a problem, they were consuming him. He began showing up late to sets, disappearing for days, and missing critical meetings. His personal life collapsed. In 1996, Robert was pulled over by police. In the car, they found heroin, cocaine, and a loaded handgun. He was arrested, but that was just the beginning. Over the next 5 years, Robert was arrested multiple times. He was sentenced to jail. At one point, he famously walked into a neighbor's house completely high and fell asleep in their child's bed. He was charged with trespassing and drug possession. Hollywood turned its back on him. In 1999, Robert was sentenced to 3 years in prison for violating probation. He spent time in California State Prison, where he scrubbed toilets and worked in the kitchen. Imagine that one of Hollywood's biggest stars reduced to prison labor. Robert later described it as hitting absolute rock bottom. After being released, he tried to make a comeback, but Hollywood wasn't interested. He was unreliable. Directors didn't want to take the risk. He was labeled as too dangerous to insure on major productions. His addiction was costing him everything. But then, something changed: love. In 2003, Robert met Susan Levin, a film producer. She was focused, driven, and stable, everything Robert wasn't. He was drawn to her, but Susan made it clear, if he didn't get clean, it was over. For the first time, Robert realized he couldn't do this alone. He checked into rehab, this time for real. He committed to sobriety. He started practicing martial arts, meditation, and therapy, and slowly, the fog began to lift. But Hollywood was still wary. Robert needed a second chance, and he found it in an unlikely place. In 2007, director Jon Favreau was casting for Iron Man. The studio didn't want Robert. He was too much of a liability. But Favreau saw something in him. He fought for Robert. Favreau said, "Robert is Tony Stark." Like Stark, Downey had brilliance, charm, and a troubled past. The role wasn't just acting, it was personal. Iron Man was a gamble, but when it hit theaters in 2008, it exploded. Robert's performance was magnetic. He was Tony Stark, funny, flawed, and brilliant. The film grossed over $585 million worldwide. And just like that, Robert Downey Jr. was back. But Robert didn't stop there. Over the next decade, he anchored the Marvel Cinematic Universe, leading the franchise to over $22 billion in box office revenue. He became the highest paid actor in Hollywood, earning over $75 million for Avengers, Endgame alone. But more importantly, Robert had found peace. He credits Susan for saving his life. He says that without her, none of this would have been possible. And today, he's not just a superstar, he's a father, a husband, and an advocate for mental health and addiction recovery. In 2019, Tony Stark's story came to an end with Avengers. But Robert Downey Jr., its story? it's far from over. From prison cells to the red carpet, from rock bottom to the top of the world, Robert Downey Jr. proved that you can rewrite your story, that you're not defined by your mistakes, but by how you rise from them. Because sometimes the greatest heroes don't wear capes. They survive their darkest moments and come back stronger